Well, good evening, everyone. The time is 6 o'clock, so I think we should make a start with this meeting. As you will observe, I am Councillor Ed Turner, not Councillor Susan Brown. Susan is one of 3 colleagues who sent apologies tonight because they're off at the Local Government Chronicle Awards. So I'll be chairing the meeting, and hopefully it will be so swift and so good that people will say we don't want the leader back, and my plan for world domination will progress. Thank you for the chuckle. Apologies for absence. I believe we have Councillors Brown, Moncongate and Upton. That's right, jolly good. We haven't received any addresses or questions from members of the public, nor have we received any councillor addresses on any items on the Cabinet agenda or indeed neighbourhood issues, nor have we got any additional items raised by Cabinet members. So we crack on then with item 6. I beg your pardon, item 7, the scrutiny reports. Catherine, I think you're here representing scrutiny. I've been told that the acoustics, particularly when the room isn't too full, are not brilliant, so don't forget, colleagues, to use microphone when you're speaking, turn it off when you're not, and ideally angle it towards you. We've got a tiny bit of a backlog of the scrutiny reports. Obviously important to hear what you've got. You should have the Cabinet responses to them, and if we can try and keep it reasonably punchy, Catherine, that'd be really appreciated, just because of the volume we've got to get through tonight. But over to you, and I think we will take all of them as they appear on the agenda and in the supplement now, rather than sort of holding off on any of them. So thank you, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So as I've been introduced, I'm the scrutiny chair for this municipal year. This is the first time I've been to the Cabinet meeting in this capacity, so just bear with me and tell me if I'm doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. But just to give you an update, first of all, we met on the 5th of June to agree the scrutiny operating principles for this year and establish the standing panels and review groups and their membership, and agreed the provisional work plan up until September. We didn't consider any Cabinet reports. Since then, the Climate Environment Panel met only yesterday and considered 3 Cabinet reports, and there were 9 recommendations presented across those reports, which we will seek a Cabinet response to. I understand that the Cabinet deferred consideration of a number of reports from its meeting on the 17th of April to the 12th of June, and there are, I think 18 recommendations which are presented across those 8 reports which are seeking Cabinet responses. So I guess I'd pause here, and then would you like me to then just set out then each of the recommendations for the different respective meetings? How would you prefer me to do it?
So my thought, but I look to colleagues to see if they want to see this differently, is that you might, if there's been a recommendation made and it's been accepted, then probably it's not worth a great long discussion because it will be a festival of agreement. However, there are some where there isn't complete agreement, sorry, I would say it's in part or not. So it might be helpful for you to perhaps focus on those, and then we can invite the Cabinet member to respond, just so at least we know where we stand. Does that seem reasonable to people? I appreciate that's focusing on points of difference, but let's take the more in common bits together for now.
I don't think I necessarily have all the correct information in front of me around this. I just have the list of the recommendations. So that makes it a little bit more tricky to then...
Okay. However, you're about to receive the correct information, which will have the whole lot, and then also the Cabinet responses. Yeah. The first one was on the, I mean, just while you're finding your place, Catherine, the first one was indeed on the tree strategy. That got quite a good workout last night. I did predict there would be a degree of interest, and so there was. And of the 8 recommendations, I think 6 were fully agreed, but there was one which couldn't be agreed. That was recommendation 4, and one where there was partial agreement, recommendation 8. Do you want to say a couple of words about those 2? Maybe Catherine and Nigel will respond, and then we'll see if there's anything else to be added and move on.
Yeah, so I'm just finding the place. So this is in yesterday's meeting. So, so with recommendation 8, this is yesterday's Climate and Environment Panel. which we refer to the that the council explicitly recognises the importance of mature trees within the tree management policy for 2024 to 32 and highlights the need for the planning process to be sympathetic to this. So that was the recommendation from the group. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear more about why you're only accepting that in part.
Yeah, that was recommendation 8. I mean, Nigel, maybe if you want to mention recommendation 8 and also briefly comment on recommendation 4. And I think there's probably a similar sort of theme to both answers, actually.
Yeah, there is. It's all about whether this policy is the right place to include comments and emphases of that kind. And the view of officers and myself is that this is a policy about city-owned trees, managed by us, owned by us on our land. So it's about, this is what it says on the tin. It's not really about planning and encouraging trees through the planning process. That's a different place. That should be through the local plan, and that's why we've not accepted. So we've not accepted your recommendation, number 18 part. And number 4 is the same theme. We do work with the county council around tree issues. In fact, the county council worked with ODS on tree issues. But this is again, I have to repeat myself. This is a policy about city-owned and managed trees on city land. So it's just not appropriate to insert paragraphs about the responsibility of the county council, how we're going to work with that, etc. So that should be covered by a different document.
Super. I hope that gives at least some flavour to why it wouldn't be possible to accept those fully. There were a couple of bits of commentary in the comments against some of the recommendations as well, but hopefully the committee will be okay with those.
And have accepted 6 of the 8,
yeah,
which is a significant number.
And I'm sure the policy is better as a consequence. Is that all right, Catherine?
I think on the particular point, which was the one with reference to the Highways Authority, I think it was really, the essence of that was around this collaborative working. It's not about the ownership of the trees or the tree pits with the city versus the county. It's about if you have, whether it's a city tree or specifically, there can be a need to collaborate with highways if there is root damage, for instance, to a pavement which is owned by the Highway Authority or their responsibility. So I think that was where the essence of that was. So just to clarify.
Okay. Nigel, I mean, I'm sure you take on board that feedback.
I take on board the thrust and the sense of need to work closely with the county, but as I say, this is not the right place to insert that sort of material. If we want to have a policy about how we work with the county on trees, we can go and develop all of that. So this is not the right place for it.
So with that, we can probably skip on to the other one from yesterday's meeting, which was the framework for the installation of renewable technologies in council-owned properties. And you'll see there's an in-part acceptance there, Catherine. That was your recommendation from the meeting. And it's on page 17 with the Cabinet response.
So just so that everybody's clear on that, what the recommendation around this was to ensure that when procurement processes are happening, that there are bids from diverse suppliers representing different diversity characteristics of the local population, so that female-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses are encouraged to bid for the procurement opportunities. It's not about making it a criteria for them to be awarded them, but it's about encouraging submissions from entities of this. And this is really to ensure that when you have the renewable energy sector or just the green economy as it develops, that it's an inclusive economy in terms of those who have business opportunities and wealth generation through that transition.
Fair enough. And do you know what? In the spirit of Christmas, I think we can change this to we agree it, because I think the point is now well taken about the encouragement side. And encouragement is okay. And I think the answer specifically is more about the evaluation side of things. So we'll show scrutiny a little bit of love on that. We'll take the feedback. It's a good point. It's just obviously procurement's quite legally constrained, and also the bottom line is we need to get the right things at the right cost. That concludes those ones, but then we've got the kind of left over ones. I think it starts with biodiversity net gain, and there were a couple of recommendations starting on page 23, one of which was accepted, the other one was accepted in part. Catherine, I don't know if you want to say anything particularly about the second one. Just stop with the microphone.
Okay. So the second recommendation in part was around council-owned land with potential to provide biodiversity units. So basically identifying sites within the city where we own as the landowner the land, and using that as a geographical location where biodiversity units could be provided to offset this part of this. So yeah, I'm interested to understand why this is only in part being accepted.
Alex, is that you? Yeah, super.
I chaired that particular panel before rejoining the cabinet, so I think Catherine was there, so I mean I can explain what we were thinking. This is an opportunity for the council to enter a market which has potential to be quite lucrative. It's something that's both a good thing for the council to do in terms of BNG for its own purposes, but also to become a player in a market which is going to grow and grow at speed thanks to the requirements of the Environment Act. So it seemed like an opportunity financially as well as environmentally, and that was what was behind the recommendation.
Yeah, and maybe one thing just to expand is that some of the land that we own is a very particular type of land, like flood meadow type, and may have a very specific opportunity within it for biodiversity net gain, and that's why there could be some appeal to some of the land that we have for this offsetting.
Thanks for that. I mean, I'm looking at it, and I think what the Cabinet response seems to say, but I'll bring Tom Bridgman in a second, is that, and would have advised the Cabinet member, is that that's a good longer-term aim, but we need probably to focus on our own council-owned assets first, just because that's something we need to discharge in order for that to happen. Tom's nodding, so we got that right. I suppose a good challenge would be thinking what's the time scale, and I wouldn't doubt that scrutiny will keep the pressure on this, and indeed the Cabinet, since Alex is well across it. So. Then the next one was the citywide retrofit strategy. There were a couple of recommendations there. Colleagues, they're on page 29 of the supplementary agenda, and one of them was an in-part acceptance as well. That was the first one. Catherine, anything you want to say on that one? And then Linda maybe might want to comment, or this might be Anna, in which case... Yeah, one or the other, fine.
So my understanding and recollection of this was around the fact that the council owns many buildings, not just those that are residential, and therefore there is a huge opportunity as we transition into net zero to look at retrofitting those other buildings within scope of this retrofit strategy, rather than looking at purely just the residential council-owned buildings, because there is a degree of control that we have over this. So yeah, it's this debate between control and influence, and since we're the owner of these, we have, regardless of residential status, the opportunity to control the retrofit of these properties.
Thank you. And actually, sorry, this was nothing to do with the housing. I think this was on the non-residential ones. Apologies. So, yeah. And I think the thought here was just that we wanted to manage scrutiny's expectations about how quickly we could deliver that piece of work. It is something that's raised quite reasonably, but it's quite a complicated area, and to be honest, one also which would need to be considered just alongside the council's budget and the rest of the sort of asset management that we undertake with our many non-residential assets. But points well understood, and again, this might well be one where you want to hold Cabinet's feet to the fire. We agree with the premise. Clearly, it's something we need to do.
May I come back to on this? And so, actually, interestingly, only last night when we were discussing a long list of additional items for climate environment scrutiny, we were also looking at the asset management strategy. I think that was at the as a potential one to add to the list. So it's good that you've closed that loop, because that is indeed something that has come up in other conversations related to the forward plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Makes much sense, and some asset colleagues are here, so they've heard and enjoyed the discussion. It takes us on to page 35, which was about tree planting, and the first recommendation was accepted in part rather than fully.
So I think just on this, because the recommendations we're referring to from March sort of have subsequently come up again in discussion yesterday. Some of these recommendations sort of predate the discussion that we had here. So I don't think there's anything else that we need to talk about on that.
Good stuff, thank you. Then we have the energy generation solar potential on council buildings, but all of those were accepted actually. So since we need to pause at that, we can probably press on. Then we have the finance performance ones on the integrated performance report, but all four of those were accepted. On the finance side, we do aim to please scrutiny, so that's okay. Then the Housing Ombudsman Complaint Handling Code Self-Assessment. There was, let's have a look, just the one recommendation. That one was accepted too. So unless there's anything particular to be said on that, we're happy. Implementation of selective licensing, one good recommendation there, and that was also accepted about communications plan. So that's good. Then you wanted to just jump in on that.
Yeah, not just accepted, but we plan to start moving ahead with that in September to mark the second anniversary of the licensing scheme, and to tie in with lots of students arriving in Oxford as well, because that's a really good time to publicise what rights they've got as tenants.
That's great, thank you.
Super, good news, thank you. And then lastly, it was on the adult exploitation report. And the second one, slightly curiously, was accepted in part, but it reads to me like there was agreement, and it was just sort of saying it may not be badged quite like that, but it will take it up. I mean, was there anything you wanted to say on that one at all, Catherine?
I think on this particularly, I understand from scrutiny, although I wasn't in the initial meeting where this was discussed, there is some carryover work that is going to continue on this, and also a very specific focus around sexual exploitation and brothels within the city. So scrutiny, we do want to understand updates on that in due course when that piece of work takes place. But it's good to hear that you are looking to carry out this social media campaign. We understand that this specific area though of the brothels in the city is an area that we want a greater focus going forward, and is in hand, so thank you.
Thanks very much, no, it's appreciated. And I might add that over the years, I think this is an area in different ways, slightly different aspects, where scrutiny's added real value in the past, and where sometimes other council meetings and processes don't necessarily afford it the space it deserves, so appreciate your work on that. With that, I think that concludes item 7. Catherine, if you're happy. You're very welcome, of course, to stay for the rest of the meeting, and equally welcome if you've got other things to do. That then takes us on to the community infrastructure levy charging schedule going forward for examination. Oh, but it doesn't. You're quite right. We swapped the order around. I do apologise. I should have flagged that at the beginning. So we've got a few tweaks just to try and make sure that people who've got domestic obligations are able to fulfil them. So in fact, it'd be the framework for the installation of renewable technologies to council-owned properties. Peter and James are here. James, thanks for coming. And I think this was one where I'm the lead member. So, let me just grab the report, apologies. Yeah, along with Linda. I mean, in essence, with the substantial investment which we hope will come forward in council-owned properties, it seems to us to make sense to have a framework approach to procurement so that we're able to procure expeditiously and without overly onerous processes, but at the same time and in a timely way, but at the same time have some fairness and robustness as the law requires, but also making sure that there's best value for the taxpayer. And that's what this aims to do and gives a green light to. James or Linda, is there anything you'd sort of want to add to Linda? No? James, anything you need to add on this? Happy? Great. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the moving forward on the procurement framework? Alex, yeah.
Yeah, just picking up the scrutiny recommendation that's been agreed now, how will that be operationalised? How will that be done?
Yeah, I think, James may have something to add on that, but we hold quite regular Meet the Buyer events, and I think we'd probably look to do those, and we'd look particularly to try to ensure that we were proactively inviting those from underrepresented groups to our Meet the Buyer events. I think that's being as proactive as we could, and we might have a look at what other bodies there were. Anything you'd want to add, James, on that?
No, thanks, Councillor. That I think is probably our best approach.
Other ideas welcome? No? Okay, but yeah, good stuff. Okay, so in that case, the recommendations are to grant the relevant approval and delegations. Can I see all those in favour? Nobody's against, so that is carried. Thank you very much. The next one are the HRA energy efficiency projects. Linda, this for yourself.
Thank you. Yes. So we've budgeted £7.45 million this year to spend on decarbonising residential stock, our council homes. We've already allocated £4 million of that, which is wrapped up in the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund projects, which attracted government funding as well, and which is going to improve the energy efficiency in 316 homes. This report is about releasing the remainder of that £7.45 million, so almost £3.5 million, and spending that on our council homes in order to make them warmer for our tenants, reduce energy consumption for our tenants, and move us closer towards the goals we have as a council in terms of getting 95% of our housing stock possessing an EPC rating of C or above by 2030, and also our ambition to move to net zero carbon emissions as a city by 2040. So the detailed programmes have yet to be worked up, but what we do know is that we'll be taking a fabric first approach, so we'll be insulating the homes, making sure that that's all the work there that is done that can be, before installing low carbon heating solutions such as an air source heat pump. So yeah, there's 5 key areas of work that we'll be funding. So improving the number of council homes which have an up-to-date EPC, bringing void properties up to EPC C before they're re-let, installing air source heat pumps in more of our homes. We'll be trialling the use of ground source heat pumps in 2 blocks, and monitoring how that works for tenants, and trying to learn all we can from that, and so we can roll it out further in future years. And developing a detailed approach to raise the EPC rating of non-traditional archetype buildings, so some of the most tricky homes to retrofit, and where after the SHDF project is complete, where the most poorly performing buildings will fit into that category. So that's an area that we really need to focus on. So yeah, I'm very pleased to move this report.
Thanks, Linda. Great stuff. Anna, James, anything you need to add on that before I bring in comments and questions? No? Alex, you wanted to come in, and I've got something to chip in as well.
Yeah, so picking up, sorry, just picking up a couple of the points in the report. I mean, it's obviously extremely good that we're making this investment, and it will make a huge difference, or has the potential to make a huge difference, not just to the energy efficiency of the properties and our carbon emissions, but to the lives of the tenants. One of the challenges with these kinds of technologies is the training, as it were, the training and education element of it, and that's referred to in the report that tenants will receive guidance and support on operating the installations. Experience back in the day when I was a councillor for Barton, where the energy recovery systems that were installed there at considerable expense. I think a survey that went back 10 years later found the vast majority of them were no longer functional because tenancy changes and so on, people just didn't know that the stuff was there, let alone how to work it. So really the question is therefore sort of about the ongoing sort of training and education, as it were. Wearing my work hat, I was in a city in Germany recently where they found exactly the same thing. A lot of stuff installed, but the need to constantly renew the training as new tenants move in and people move on is a requirement. So just have we thought about that? Are we going to be able to budget for that kind of support and so on? And the other sort of related question is that we're doing a survey of of where we're putting the heat pumps in to see how they're going to work. And it said we're going to survey how the systems work, and we also look at how people use them. That's a subtly different question. But one finding from other places which have improved energy efficiency is that you don't necessarily improve the carbon performance straight away, because the thing that people do is turn the temperature up to what they've always wanted it to be but couldn't afford. And so, which is a perfectly reasonable thing for people to do, I think. But I think it'd be interesting just to sort of see what the user elements of the system is, as well as the actual mechanics of the system. But so kind of two sections there: the training and the education, as it were, and the sort of post installation evaluation.
Thanks. Let's collect a few if we may, and then bring Linda and James in. But mine was actually maybe a tiny bit related, particularly to the first one. We've got some energy efficiency officers funded by the HRA who work on our council housing stock. Terrific posts. I've seen them make a real difference to tenants. The genesis, I think, was our reflection that before we did some very expensive retrofitting, cladding houses, whatever it might be, sometimes there'd be sort of quick wins where we might be able to help people. So I hope we'll also continue that work to get the really quick and inexpensive wins, and I also hope we will draw on their expertise when it comes to working with our tenants and indeed identifying properties which particularly need the focus. That was what I was going to chip in. Any more before I bring Linda and James back in? No, Linda.
I think they're all really good points, well made, that I'm happy to follow up, but I don't have anything more to add on them at this stage.
I would say, Councillor, that noticeably improvement around app technologies, so the monitoring technology is improving quite a lot, so I think we can address quite a few of the usage pattern questions because the software is available now. As far as training goes, we've noticed suppliers, as the technology has been emerging, have developed YouTube type videos and then educational videos which we can embed in the Void process, especially as we're doing some of this work through the Void streams as well. That would be an opportunity, and ideally eventually embed that in the asset management system as part of the property information, so when a new letting comes up we can make the information available.
Thanks, good points, thank you. Anna?
On this point, we are hoping to, so a lot of this work is currently being done, both the sort of engagement work and the monitoring work is currently being done in the Clean Heat Streets scheme in Rose Hill. I've been basically trying to work out how we can basically continue doing some of that work basically with that officer who's been basically going into people's homes and doing this work and beyond the length of that scheme. So yeah, it's very much on my radar.
Excellent, thank you very much. A really pleasing report to hopefully agree. We're recommended to grant the project approval and then also the appropriate delegations. Can I see all those in favour? Any against? There aren't any. So that too is agreed. Thanks very much. James, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but you might choose not to.
Thank you very much.
Next up is the tree management policy. Nigel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ed. We review this policy every 8 years, so it's obviously time. Last time we looked at it was 2016. And actually it's very timely for a number of reasons I'm about to go into. It covers the management of trees and the ownership of them in the control of the City Council. There are alternative arrangements in place, as we discussed earlier, for county council owned trees, which are often supported by ODS and so on, but they're not part of this policy. The first thing I want to say is that actually the policy is quite articulate and elegant in its expression of the value of trees when I was reading it again today. I mean, trees are a very important part of people's lives and our lives in the city. They enhance the quality of life, and we definitely saw that explicitly during the COVID period. So we need to nurture and look after our trees, and this policy is about how we will look after the ones that the city owns and manages. The major change is around how we manage risk. Because most of the time trees are, flourishing and lovely to look at, and there's no particular danger to the public. But occasionally they do get diseased, and they do become weaker. And therefore it's very important that we go around and survey them regularly to make sure that we mitigate the risks to the public. And so the policy articulates 3 zones or 3 levels of risk: high, medium and low. And one of the changes will be that we'll be looking at those trees that are in the high risk category much more frequently than before. At the moment we do it every 3 years. We're going to halve that time, we're going to have to do it every 18 months. And that will bring us into line with best practice. And also, I think it also relates to some of the findings of previous inquests in the last 8 years too, which have accentuated the need to keep a real close eye on those trees which could harm the public, where the public obviously cycle or move past in large numbers. The other thing that I think is important is that there's a tonal shift to this document. I think it's really important that there is proper consultation with councillors and interested parties when we're going to take trees down for whatever reason, when we're going to plant new trees in an area. It is a partnership, it's not a dictatorship. And I think that's really, really important that comes out from this policy as accentuated. Obviously, if you have an emergency and a large storm and a tree falls over across a main road, that is simply not practical to go around and have a major consultation exercise. But in most other cases where you're doing tree work, that's not the situation, and therefore it's important that we engage properly with ward councillors and interested parties. We want to encourage new planting schemes wherever we can, and obviously we want to consult with stakeholders about them. So it's not just about us saying to stakeholders, we're going to go and do this. It's about talking to them about what they'd like to see, what type of trees, what's the feasibility, how they can be funded, and so on and so forth. The other area that I think has become more sensible in this policy is that there are exceptional circumstances where trees cause issues. They can be too big on occasion, they can block people's light, they can become overbearing, they can cause physical damage to property over time because of the root spread and so on. So there must be the option, the policy in exceptional circumstances to do something about that. And therefore there's been some wording added against the previous policy which while normally we wouldn't tackle those things, exceptionally we would, and therefore we need to have that option to do so. So I think those are the main points really that are different from the previous policy. There's a lot of other stuff in here, but I don't think we need to go through all of that in that level of detail. Chair, thank you.
Terrific, thanks Nigel. And this certainly got a thorough discussion at scrutiny. There were some recommendations accepted. I think some of those lead to some developments in the text. And when we agree the recommendations, then if we agree with recommendations, we'll agree the policy, but also allow delegated authority to make minor non-substantive changes. And I think that then can cover off the scrutiny ones as well, but we'll do that straight away. Tom, is there anything you need to add on this?
There is some policy wording changes that we need to make to PL7, which is on page 64 of the pack. Effectively, this is powers that we have under the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. Great title. And what this policy is seeking to do is where there's trees on private land that's affecting council land, that we can intervene. using that act. But I think on reflection, we also need to add that we can intervene where there's trees on private land that is creating imminent danger to the public, irrespective of our own land. So I was asked to read out the wording, so if I may. Or do you think that's enough of a minor change?
I think we'll be okay about hearing it. I can't imagine anyone is going to object to the wording on that. And you've seen it and happy with it? No, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Emma, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to make it clear really that what the wording does, just so members understand, is it doesn't state that we will do something. It sets out that we have the power and that as a last resort we may do it. It's just to make sure that it's clear to the public that where there is this issue with the tree on private land, we do have powers and we'll consider it on a case-by-case basis.
Terrific. Well understood. Thank you very much indeed. So we'll now open up any discussion on the whole policy, not just that little clause that we've had drawn attention to. And Alex, you were keen to come in.
Well, having just been down to the railway station where all the bus stops are shut because there's some trees which are, I don't know who's owned, anyway, whatever, where they've caused the pavement harm. When we say private land, what about another public authority? So if, for example, a tree, I'm going to use the NHS because they own that. If there was a tree that was growing on NHS land which fell under these categories and was a potential risk, is that covered by this policy, or do we have to kind of do something different?
Thanks. Alex, I'll bring Emma in. I would have thought private land here meant land we don't own, and of course we don't have to do it, but over to you, Emma. You know.
It is indeed private land that we don't own. So the policy itself generally is about our management of trees. It's just that we have this discretion due to regards to trees on other land that's not within our ownership or control.
Okay, so private is everything except justice.
Yes, good stuff. Any other comments on this? Been a subject of a fair bit of discussion previously, and it's a subject of interest to the public, as we all know. But it doesn't look like there are any further points. So, with that in mind, can I see those in favour of adopting the policy and agreeing the relevant delegation? Again, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Then the next one is the SIL draft charging schedule. I've got a feeling that Louise may have lined up a member to say a couple of words about this. And it's me. Jolly good. Thanks. Thank you very much indeed. So, that's right. I mean, essentially, we to headline it, but I will maybe bring in officers to say just a couple of words more. When we vary our SIL charging schedule, we have to consult. We then have to have the hearing before it can go forward and be adopted. This in particular brings potentially some quite significant extra income through an increase to one particular category of development, which is proving where it's appropriate to charge more, if I put it that way. Officers, would you like to just give people a very quick flavour of what you're recommending here?
Right, well, basically, this was only a partial review, so we're only recommending on increasing office, which is EG, and R&D, because that's where we seem to be having a lot of planning permissions coming through at the moment. So it's the first time we've actually increased since we introduced SIL in 2013. We initially thought that we were going to increase B2, B8, but since then, after consultation and further viability testing, we've taken that back to what it was previously and not going to increase that. So it's just the two, office and R&D, which we will be increasing, hopefully.
Lorraine, thanks ever so much, and Lan, thank you for joining us. Let's see if there's any questions on this. Alex?
I've got two questions. So one on the use class. So at the moment the use class is use class E, and obviously the tables in the report identify different bits of use class E, some of them with the subsection and some of them not. And just want to understand what the current state of play is on differentiating within a use class in that way. So obviously the current use class B is divided up into B1, B2, B8 and so on, whereas use class E is not formally subdivided. So just want to be sure what the advice is on being able to put forward a SIL which has different levels for different elements within the same use class. So that was the first question. Second one, which I hope will be easier, but it might not be, is the what's the sort of current stick a finger in the air estimate of what you think this will raise across the local planning period? I appreciate it's difficult because obviously planning applications come through on sites that are already in use, so it's not like you can go along through just the allocated sites, but some sense of what you think SIL will raise or what this variation will raise, whichever number seems easier to obtain.
Thanks. The second of those questions was on a number of people's lips, the first maybe slightly less so. Are there any other questions before I bring the officers back in? No? Okay. Lan, I think you were going to come in on first one.
Okay, so in response to the first question, the SIL PPG paragraph 22 sets out that we don't actually have to set things strictly by the use class themselves. So in the administration of SIL itself, we would look upon the planning application and the divisions that we'd set here, office and R&D in particular, are ones where we could then look at the planning application and then charge it as such. The guidance essentially says it's not strictly defined by use class, and other authorities as well have charging schedules which specifically look at a specific type of development within the use class as part of their charging schedule. So this is broadly standard practice. In response to your second question, yes, we did, and as part of our examination library for submission, it was part of our consultation documents as well. We did provide a estimation in our infrastructure funding gap statement about the anticipated funds that raising the office and R&D uses would give us, and it would generate over the plan period an additional 35.8 million, which would be a 28.6 million increase from our current charging rates. So it's there and it's publicly available as well. So I hope that answers your questions.
Remind us what the plan period is.
Up to 2040.
20 to 2040. Okie dokie. So we won't spend it all at once. Any more on this? Before we agree or vote on recommendations, they are to approve the relevant statements and submission and provide the relevant delegations. Can I see all those in favour? Livna, are you okay? Yeah, good. That too is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Lorraine, Dan, thanks ever so much for coming. Again, welcome to stick around if you're interested in car parks or other things like that. If you're equally, no? Okay, good. Next up is the off-street parking places order and car park tariffs. Emma, this is yourself. Am I teed up to do this one, or is somebody else? Okay. I think this is relatively straightforward, to be honest, and it does what it says on the tin. There are a couple of reasons for varying car parks. One is the better management. So in some cases, car parks identified in this report are being essentially present a bit of a loophole for people who want to park and then not to use the facility to which they're adjacent, but instead commute, for example. That means that those that would be there for the intended purpose don't have a space, or alternatively there are little loopholes in the charging, which mean that, again, the use is sort of biased in a way which is not what's expected. The other is that sometimes we also need to raise money to cover the cost of looking after our car parks and keeping them shipshape, providing other services, whatever it might be. And these are variations, and proposed charges which are brought forward with that in mind. Emma, anything you'd want to add on that?
No, I think you've covered it. It's just to say that the income that these car parks would generate has already been included in the budget round. So this is just formalising that we do want to bring it into the traffic order. At the same time, we'll create that new traffic order because we've been using the same one since 2011, and quite honestly, it's a little bit messy with all the variations that we've done to it over the years. So it's a good opportunity to neaten it up and split it out over the portfolio, so it'll just work better for us as a council going forward.
Lovely job. Any questions or comments on this one? Linda?
What can we do about bringing in greater regulation of parking on car parks that we own but which fall outside of our city boundaries? I'm thinking particularly about Shotover car park, which is in desperate need of investment. It's in really poor condition. And also at Horsepath at the athletics ground there, where once the cemetery opens, there's going to be a lot of pressure on that car park.
So it's a little bit more tricky where it falls outside of our boundary because we are not really the enforcing authority. So we can't add them to our own traffic order. We can only add car parks within our city boundary to our own traffic order, and the traffic order is what allows you to have those enforcement powers. So one of the things that we are looking to do is to work with SODC to understand what our opportunities are about perhaps adding it to their traffic order and then acting more as a managing agent. We have approached them previously and they weren't keen on progressing that, but it was a number of years ago, so it's something that we're going to look to revisit over the next year.
Great stuff, thank you. Keep us posted. Any more on this? No? Today we learned that the next Prime Minister is a keen motorist and enjoys motoring, so I think he'd be very welcome to come and try out some of our car parks, provided he pays the appropriate fee. Can I see, so the recommendations, so I should have put them in front of me, are to make the relevant approvals of schedules of charges and also the relevant delegations of authority. Can I see those in favour? Any against? No? Okay, that's agreed. Emma, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And again, you're welcome to stick around if you like. Oh, you are? Good, there you go. Normally people don't take us up on that offer, but it's great. And don't miss the Oxfordshire Council's charter, that's going to be the highlight. So, next one is the contract for rebuild cost assessments. Ted as well, thanks for joining us. This one is myself and Linda. And unlike some of the reports, it's a rather unwelcome one. My understanding is that the local authority insurance market is really very difficult. The work on rebuild cost assessments, which we've previously done in-house using our best estimates, no longer satisfies the tenderer for our insurance, and as a consequence it's necessary, required in order for us to be insured, for us to engage specialist assistance and pay for specialist assistance in order to provide the correct estimates to the insurance company. Be fair to say, in the run-up to this coming forward to Cabinet as members, we gave this a fair bit of challenge because there's a significant sum of money involved and clearly not something we wanted to commission lightly, but we've had very clear advice, I think, from officers that to not go down this road would leave us at the risk of not being insured, which is not a good place to be. I know we did ask officers as well, just to see whether there were any other local authorities who were encountering the same issue, because oddly, for a burden of this scale, it's not really something that's been featured in the local government press or on the grapevine. So, Linda, is there anything you wanted to add on this? No? In that case, officers, if I pass you for anything else you want to add, but you might also want to address the other local authority question, if you've got anything to add to it.
Yes, so we have spoken to some of the other local authorities. Most of the ones we have spoken to do use external parties to undertake their cost assessments for insurance purposes.
There we go. Out of interest, did you get the chance as well to compare whether they were sort of facing the same rough level of financial challenge with this, and also they have the same relative lack of competition in the market? I think it'd be fair to say that we've not been inundated with people wanting to do our insurance for us, which may partly be at the root of this.
So we've spoken to quite a number of local authorities, and we have been, we spoke to one that have about 900 assets. They have 4 in-house surveyors delivering this for them, which would cost rather a lot of money. They also do spot checks, but it's a lot less assets than we have. We have 8,000 in the HRA alone, plus another 1,100 in the general fund. So we would need a team well in excess of 4 people to deliver it. A lot of people, a lot of the local authorities, as they're re-tendering their insurance, they're running into exactly the same issue. So the insurance market is just tightening, it is becoming more difficult, and there's less insurers willing to really entertain these large portfolios with this level of risk. So I think the amount per survey that we have estimated seems to be in line with what other local authorities are paying, but we won't know for certain until we actually go out to the market and test it.
Thanks for filling that in. Anna?
Just a sort of question of why there seems to be more risk in this sector than, say, just a normal commercial portfolio, as perceived by the market, because I genuinely don't get that.
I think some of the biggest risks we've got at the moment are housing stock. So there's been some significant claims in the past around residential properties. We've had some relatively large claims ourselves as well, where the sum insured has been less than the cost to rebuild the damaged property. So they have flagged some issues around that.
And the flurry of hands I see. So we've got Nigel, Emma, and then Alex.
Yeah, some of the discussions we've had with other local authorities, it is difficult to find other local authorities that still retain the level of housing stock that we have, basically. But some of those authorities that we have spoke to, only about 1 or 2 actually, the cost per 1,000 insured is roughly the same, basically. And I think, as Emma says, basically it is a sort of tightening up by certainly the supplier we're using, basically, on all things to do with insurance. They're basically battening down the hatches, trying to lower their risk by understanding exactly what the stock is. And it's just because we have 8,500 stock, basically, and the amount of work we need to do to actually get that level of assurance, basically, is quite considerable. Emma?
Just to add to, I suppose, the difference between a local authority or public body and a commercial entity, as you'll know, nationally there are firms, for example, who will go around seeking clients in order to bring group actions, or their specific focus will be bringing a claim against a council due to disrepair. So there's inherently more risk as a local authority, because it's of a nature where you get this kind of persistent chasing of matters to be brought forward and persistent claims.
Thanks. Alex?
So my question is then, if the issue is the residential portfolio, and if the risk change is in the residential portfolio, why is the bulk of the cost falling on the general fund and not the HRA? Surely it should be the other way round.
So the way we're proposing to do it is that we would value all the assets in the general fund. They're all relatively unique, whereas in the HRA we'll adopt a beacon-style approach, so we'll use the beacon properties to value.
So follow up. So once this 3-year cycle is over, then that balance will switch then on that basis, or are you proposing to do a valuation on all the non-HRA properties permanently, or is this a one-off exercise?
This is an ongoing exercise, so every 3 years they would be subject to a physical inspection to update the valuation.
I think the words painting of the fourth bridge should be used. it's a rather unwelcome exercise. Any more on... Yes, Linda, yeah.
Yeah, just so while every 3 years there will be a physical inspection, but we should be able to draw on a lot of the background work, the paperwork which is done during this first exercise, whether it's in future rounds of this work, there should be less work to do.
I suppose a big chunk of the cost will be the actual inspection and writing up of the report. They'll have some of the background information that have built up over a period of time that they may not have had on the first round of inspections. And there may be changes to the beacon properties in the HRA fund over time as well.
Alex?
Final prod at this particularly unsavoury situation. Going back to the one of the recommendations on scrutiny, which related to energy efficiency in this same property portfolio, over the, I suppose, medium to longer term, so after this cycle of 3 years, are there strategies that we should pursue as a landlord, for example, transferring some of the risk for this inspection and insurance stuff to tenants in the general fund properties and ignoring the HRA ones for the time being, because that doesn't seem to be so much of an issue, which would reduce this cost somewhat. It does seem, with one bidder, a requirement that every property is inspected every 3 years and a report written, that just for insurance purposes, when you could use the same process to identify, for example, referring back previously to opportunities for improving the energy performance of the building or whatever it might be. Are there things we can do differently, or things we can do more in conjunction, so a more holistic look at the building in order to kind of like avoid what feels like a fairly, a lot of money for not a great deal at the moment?
It's industry standard to do this, so I think regardless of which underwriters we had awarded the contract to, it's likely that they would want a similar level of understanding in the value of the portfolio. In terms of how we could look to mitigate it, it's standard practice for commercial style landlords to cover the insurance for their properties and recharge that cost to tenants. So in the general fund, the cost of carrying out the inspections from the majority of the tenants, we are able to recover that cost, as well as the cost of insuring them as well.
That is a rare bit of good news. Thank you very much for that. Good. Okay. So with that, I think what officers have heard in the course of this discussion, and I think it's likely we'll agree the recommendation, but I think we're quite keen to keep a watching brief on this. We're quite keen to see that in an ideal world we don't have different women and men with clipboards wandering around to the same properties. If we can avoid it, if we can minimise that, I think we're keen that ideally, knowledge is transferred between cycles. I think we're interested in whether there are ways of looking at the insurance differently. For example, picking HLM General Fund apart might not be work. And I think in all this, we recognise you've been doing your absolute best. And in other bits of the insurance market, we do read more about it being harder and costs having gone up, and that may well just be the world we're in. So those are just sort of things I think we've covered in the discussion. I hope that's all right. With that, we're asked to recommend the provision of a revenue budget to council. So this is something which will need to go to council, so we can look forward to the whole debate again. Give a project approval and agree to delegations of authority. Can I see all those in favour? Nobody against, so that's agreed. And thank you for answering all those questions. I suppose it made it feel all worthwhile. The next one is write-off of commercial tenant rent arrears. That is myself. I would note that there is a confidential appendix on this one, so if anyone wants to dive into detail of this, we'll need to go into confidential session. I could perhaps say quite generally that we do write off money as a last resort, but sometimes if a business folds, if there are no assets, then that's what we have to do, and it's indeed part of sound financial management that we do that. And we've also been in correspondence about the fact that if a business didn't, for example, fold in the way that we expected, then we could reactivate a debt. And that's the case. That covers the principle of what we're looking at in the public session. I'm looking to... Is there anything you need to add on that, Ted? No? Okay, that covers it. Does anyone have any questions public on this? No? Any for the confidential session? No? Okay, we'll take the confidential appendix as read, and we're asked to approve the write-off of arrears related to properties identified in exempt appendix 1. Can I see those in favour? Nobody against. That is then agreed. Thank you very much. You are, though, welcome to stay for the Oxfordshire Council's Charter. I'll start in, but I fear you're voting with your feet. Oxfordshire Council's Charter. Anna.
Yes, it is my great pleasure to introduce this report on behalf of, I think, both Susan and Tuo. This charter is all about promoting a closer working relationship with the different levels of local government within Oxfordshire. It is very much a non-binding document drafted by officers from various levels of local government across Oxfordshire. Turned the mic off with my knee. Okay. And there's been a consultation period. A working group looked at it. I think this is going to be fairly uncontroversial.
Cheers. Looks like a good piece of work to me. Emma, anything you need to add? No? Okay. Any points of discussion or debate on this report? No? In that case, we will move to the recommendations. And the recommendation is simply to approve the charter, which is something we can do as Cabinet. There's a baby Lubna's hand shot up there. Lubna's a big fan of this. Okay. Nobody's against it. That's good. So that is carried. We move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 17th of April. To me, they look an accurate record. Any disagreement with that? No? Any matters arising on those minutes at all? No? Okay. We've got the dates of future meetings which are presented to us here. Next meeting being the 10th of July. We note that. And at 7:02, the meeting is closed.